In this tutorial, I will show you how to create this really cool stylized shader in Blender. And this stylized shader could be used for many things, so it could be used as sort of like a comic book or toon style shader, or it could also be used to show off the wireframe of your 3D objects. And I'll also show you how to group the material into this nice little shader node right here, and then you can just use the node wrangler to preview the different color versions. And then I'm also going to show you how to set up this lighting rotation so that you can rotate this Z value and it's going to rotate the light around. And you can change the lighting to work best for your scene, and you can get some really cool results. And if you'd like to purchase the tutorial files, then I will have links in the description to where you can purchase the tutorial files on my Gumroad store. And you can also get access to the tutorial files if you join my Patreon page. And my Gumroad store and Patreon page are both great ways to help support me and this channel. Now this material looks pretty much exactly the same in both the Cycles rendering engine and the Eevee rendering engine, so I'm going to be using Eevee because it does render faster, but this looks pretty much exactly the same in Cycles as well. Now this is a procedural material, but to get the wireframe effect, I am going to be using a basic geometry node setup. So the final look doesn't come completely from a procedural material. I do use a basic geometry node setup to create the wireframe, and then I add that to all of the objects. And in the video, I will show you how I created the wireframe in geometry nodes. So to showcase this stylized material, I'm going to be adding the material onto these different primitive shapes. And then I've also created this cool little sci-fi corridor that I'm adding it onto as well. And then I've also added in my sci-fi mech robot, and I have a complete tutorial series on my YouTube channel on how to create this mech robot. I'll have a link in the description if you'd like to check that out. So I'm now going to click right up here to go to the shading workspace. And so in the shading workspace, I have the 3D space right here, and then I have the shader nodes over here. Now none of these objects have materials. So what I'm going to do is select one of these objects here, and then I'm going to click on new, and I'll just rename this to stylized shader. Now I want all of the other objects in the scene to have the same material, so I'm just going to press the A key to select all the objects, and then I'm going to hold down the Shift key and make sure I select this object last. Then I can press Control L, and Control L will bring up the link and transfer data, and I'm going to click on link materials. So now if I click on these different objects, they all have the stylized shader material. Or for your scene, you can just select the different objects and then click on the drop down and add the stylized shader that you've added. And then I will also be using the Node Wrangler add-on to preview different nodes. So if you don't have that enabled, you can click on Edit and then go to the Preferences. And then over there in the Add-ons tab, you can search for Node Wrangler and just check mark the Node Wrangler add-on. So I'm actually going to click on the principled shader and I'm going to press X to delete it. So I'm now going to press Shift A. Let's go here to the search, and I'm going to search for the bevel node. Let's drop the bevel node right here. And then using the feature of the Node Wrangler, I can Control Shift and select it to preview it. And then let's also hold down the Z button and go up into the rendered view so we can see what this is looking like. So we are previewing the bevel's normal, and so this is going to give us a normal output. And what the object's normal is it's the rotation of the faces. So you can see as the faces change their rotation, the normal color is going to be different. But you can see right here on both of these planes, it is this dark blue on the ground, and that's because these planes are both pointed upwards. So as the rotation of the faces change, the colors change on the normal. So I can use this to create stylized shading. So I'm going to press Shift A, let's go here to the search, and I'm going to search for a color ramp, and we're going to drop the color ramp right in here in this wire. And so now you can see it looks black and white. Now you can see on some of the objects, especially these objects over here, which are kind of smoothed out, there is a bit of fading. And so to make this more stylized, I'm going to click on the linear here, and I'm going to change this instead to constant. Now when I do that, everything looks black, and that's because I need to click on this white tab here in the color ramp, and I need to drag it over. And so this is going to give us kind of that cartoon shading effect. Now I don't just want to use white and black, I do want to have some amount of shading, so I'm going to click and drag and bring the white tab over here, and then I'm going to hold down the Control key and click right in the middle, and that's going to add another tab. And then this tab, I'm going to click on the color, and I'm just going to make this kind of like a gray color. And then I'm going to hold down the Control key and click again to add another tab there. And this color I can make a little bit brighter as well. And you can see as I start to do this, we're creating a shading effect. So I'm going to hold down the Control key and click again in the color ramp to add another tab, and then this one I'm going to make it a little bit brighter but kind of still a dark gray. Now if you select an object and rotate it, you can see as I rotate it, it's also rotating the shading. And I do like this because this way the lighting is consistent. So like right now, it kind of looks like the bright light is over here and it's shining down on the objects because the right side of the objects are all the brightest. But if you didn't want this, if you didn't want the lighting to change when the object rotates, then you could instead press Shift A, go here to the search, and you could search for the texture coordinate node, and I'm just going to drop this up here, and then the texture coordinate node also has a normal, so I could plug the normal into the factor instead. And so this is going to look similar, but now if I rotate the monkey head, you can see that the lighting isn't changing. Now the problem with this is that the lighting now isn't consistent, so if I rotate the monkey head over, now the brightest part is over here, but then on this object, the brightest part is over here. To fix this though, you could select the object and press Ctrl A, and then you could apply the object's rotation. And so the object's rotation is applied, so now the lightest part is over on this side, and that's consistent with the rest of the objects. So you could use the texture coordinate if you wanted to. I'm just going to leave this here for now, but I am going to use the bevel normal instead because I like that better. Now on this bevel node, I'm going to turn the radius to 0 and also turn the samples all the way down to the minimum of 2. Now, if you want to change the angle of the lighting for all the objects, you can press Shift A, go here to the search, and you can search for a mapping node. We're going to stick the mapping node right here in between the bevel and the color ramp. So the value that I like to change is the Z rotation. So I can rotate this around and now the lighting is going to change. And I could also rotate the Y and the X, but I don't really like the effect quite as much. You can play around with those if you want to, but I find that changing the Z rotation looks the best. And a value that I really like on the Z rotation is 420. So I'm going to change that Z rotation to 420. I like how that looks. So this is looking pretty cool, but it doesn't really have any shadows and none of the shading is very soft. And so I do want to add kind of a little bit of shadows and a little bit more shading. So to do this, I'm going to press Shift A. Let's go here to the search, and I'm going to search for the ambient occlusion node. And let's stick the ambient occlusion over the mapping, and then I can Control Shift and select the ambient occlusion to preview it. So you can see here in the cracks or where objects are really close to each other, it is very dark, but then kind of right out here where it's more flat and open, it is lighter. And you can see it also makes it appear as though there's kind of a shadow underneath some of the objects. Now, if you want to make the ambient occlusion more visible, you can turn up the distance value. So I find for this shader that a distance value of 18 looks pretty good. Now, if you're using cycles render, then you probably want to turn this down because this might make things pretty dark. But for Blender Eevee, the distance value I think looks pretty good at 18. And then if you want to make this a little bit more contrasty, you can select this color ramp and you can press Shift D to duplicate it. We're going to drop it here after the ambient occlusion. And then I want to reset the color ramp, so I can hit the backspace button with the color ramp selected. That's going to reset it. You can also click on the arrow here and click on Reset Color Ramp. So now that the color ramp is reset, I can start to drag these two tabs together, and you can see it's going to be a bit more contrasty. And also, if you're using the cycles rendering engine, then this might be a bit too much, so you may not want to make it that contrasty, but I'm using Blender Eevee, so I'm going to make this a bit more contrasty. And now you can really see that the ambient occlusion is darker, especially right down there under the objects. They really look like they have a shadow. So I now want to combine these two different color ramps together. So to do this, I'm going to select the first color ramp, hold down the Shift key, and select the second color ramp. I can now press Ctrl 0, and that is using a feature of the Node Wrangler add-on, and it's going to add this mix RGB, and it's going to mix them both together. So the top color ramp can just go into color 1, and the bottom color ramp can go into color 2. And then you can drag the factor to blend between the two color ramps. Now I've found that a factor of 0.931 looks pretty good. I like 0.931, and so if you turn it up to 0.931, it's mostly going to use the bottom color ramp, but then it's just going to add a little bit of the top color ramp. So this does make the ambient occlusion a bit more subtle, but you can definitely see it. Like right in here, you can see that there's that darkening right there in the corners, and you can also drag these together if you want to be a bit more contrasty. So this shader definitely is looking better, but we still can't see the wireframes of the object. object. So to add a wireframe, I'm going to be adding a basic geometry node setup to these objects. So I'm going to click right up here when the crosshair appears, and then I can click and drag down, and this is going to split the window. And then right up here, I'm going to click on this to change the editor type, and I'm going to change this to the geometry node editor. And then just select an object, and I'm going to click on new here to add new geometry nodes, and then I can rename the geometry nodes to wireframe. So when you add geometry nodes to an object, it's going to add the geometry nodes as a modifier. So let's create the wireframe geometry nodes, and then we'll add it to all of the other objects. So to start off, I'm going to press Shift A. Let's go to the search, and I'm going to search for a mesh to curve. So I'm going to drop the mesh to curve right here, and now you can see it's giving us the look of the wireframe. Now this wireframe doesn't actually have any thickness, so we want to give it some thickness and turn it back into a mesh. So I'm now going to press Shift A. Let's go to the search, and I'm going to now search for a curve to mesh. So I'm going to click on the curve to mesh and drop it right here after the mesh to curve. So I need to add a curve profile to actually give it some thickness. So I'm going to press Shift A. Let's go to the search, and I'm going to search for a curve circle. So we're going to add the curve circle, just stick it right up here. Now the resolution of 32 is pretty high, so I'm going to turn this way down to like a 6. And if this resolution is still laggy for you, you could turn it down even more, but I'm going to leave it as a resolution of 6. And then let's plug the curve into the profile curve. So the curve circle is telling all of the curves what shape it's going to be. Now the radius is way too big, so I'm going to turn the radius way down. So I'm going to be using a value of 0.002, just a 0.002, and that is going to make it much smaller, but if you kind of zoom in here, you can definitely see it has some thickness there. And you can of course play around with the radius depending on the size of your objects and how thick you want the wireframe to be. Now right now we just have a wireframe of our object, but I want to add the original geometry back up. So to do this, I'm going to press Shift A. Let's go here to the search, and I'm going to search for the join geometry, and we're going to stick the join geometry right here before the group output. So I can now take the original geometry, we're going to pull out a wire here and stick this into the join geometry. So these nodes right up here are creating the wireframe, but then we're adding the original geometry back in, and so now we're combining them together. And if you zoom into the edges of the object, you can see we have the wireframe there. Now right now the wireframe has the same material, but instead of it having the same material, I want it to be black or whatever custom material you want. So what I've done is I've added this cube right here. We just need some sort of object to add a new material to, so you can just press Shift A and add a cube or any other object. So just select any object, and then we want to delete any of the materials, and then we want to click on new to add a new material. So right here I can just click to rename this, and I'm going to rename this to wireframe. Now I don't want to use the principled shader because I don't want any shading, so I'm going to select the principled shader, and I can press X to delete it, and then I'm going to press Shift A. Let's go here to the search, and I'm going to search for the RGB node. So the RGB node is just a color value. I'm going to drop this here, and then I can plug the color into the surface. So just make sure you are in rendered mode in the 3D viewport, and I can change this to any color. So I'm going to make this fully black. With the node selected, I can press F2, and then I'm going to type in wireframe color. So there we go, wireframe color. So now I'm going to click back on this object here, and this object has the geometry nodes. Now if you zoom into the wireframe is still using the material of the object. So what I'm going to do in the geometry node editor is press Shift A. Let's go here to the search, and I'm going to search for the set material node. So we are going to put the set material right after the curve to mesh. We don't want to stick it right here after the join geometry because that's going to affect all of the geometry, but we instead just want it to affect the wireframe. So just put the set material after the curve to mesh. So we can now click right here to choose a material, and I'm going to click on the wireframe. So now just the wireframe part of the object is going to use the wireframe material, but then because we haven't set a material for the rest of the object, it's going to use the stylized shader material. So I now want to add the geometry nodes wireframe to all of the other objects. So to do this, I'm just going to press the A key to make sure all the objects are selected. And then lastly, hold down the Shift key and make sure you select the objects with the geometry nodes last. Now right here on the geometry nodes modifier, on the modifier properties, you can click on the drop down and you can click on copy to selected. And so this is going to give all of the other objects the wireframe geometry nodes modifier. All right, so this is pretty much much the basic setup for the stylized shader. Now there is a few more things that I want to do. I want to set up this material so that it's a bit more customizable, and then I also want to create some different color versions like blue and red and some other cool stylized colors. So what I'm going to do here in the shader editor is press the A key to deselect all the nodes. I can now press B for the box select, and I'm just going to box select all these nodes, but I'm not going to select the material output and the viewer. I can now press Control G, and Control G is going to create a node group. Now if I press the tab key, that is going to go in and out of the group. Now if you select the node group, you can press F2 and that'll add a label, and I'm going to rename this to Stylized Shader. Now when we're just previewing the node group, we don't really have any way to customize the material. So I'm going to press the tab key to go into edit mode. So the first thing that I want to do is bring this group input down, and I'm just going to stick it under the bevel. I can now pull out a wire from the rotation here on the mapping, and I'm going to put that into the group input. So if I now press tab to go out of the node group, we have this rotation value, and these values are the same values as these right here. So we are basically previewing these values outside of the node group. So I can now drag this around and that'll change the rotation of the lighting. Now if I press tab again to go into the node group, I can select the group input, and then I can press the N key to open up the side panel. And if you click right here on the group tab, you can see we have inputs and outputs. So on the input here, I can double click on this to rename it. So I'm going to rename this to light rotation and hit enter. So now if I press tab, you can see that this says light rotation. And then I will press tab again to go back into the node group. Now the next thing that I want to do is create a bunch of different versions of the colors. So to do this, I'm going to bring the group output back, and then I'm going to press Shift A. Let's go here to the search, and I'm going to search for a color ramp, and let's click on the color ramp and drop it here between the mix and the group output. And then if I press the N key to open up the side panel and go to the group, you can see there is the outputs. So we can actually rename the group outputs as well. So I'm going to rename this one just to gray. So now if I press the tab key to go back out of this, you can see that we have this gray one right here. So now we can create a bunch of different varieties of color with the different color ramps, and we can plug them all up to the stylized shader. So I'll press the tab key again to go into the node group. And then I'm going to click on this color ramp and I'm going to bring it up a bit. And then I'm going to press Control Shift D. So Control Shift D is going to duplicate the node but keep the wires plugged up. And then to preview this color ramp, I'll just Control Shift and select it to preview it. So I'm just going to start by dragging this out to make it a bit brighter. And then this one, I'm going to click on the color here and I'm just going to make this kind of like a light blue. And then I'm also going to hold down the Control key and click right here. That's going to add another tab. And then I can click here on the color. And this one I'm going to make kind of like a blue color, but then also make it kind of a gray color. So let's now do the next one. So with the color ramp selected, I'm going to press Control Shift D, and then we can Control Shift and select the next color ramp. So I want this one to be a stronger blue color, so I'm going to click on this color right here, and I'm going to make this a much deeper blue color and a bit brighter. And then I can drag these over, and that's going to make it a bit more contrasty, so that is looking pretty cool. And of course, we'll be able to change the rotation to kind of change how that looks later on. So let's add another one. So I'm going to press Control Shift D, bring it down here, and then I'll Control Shift and select it to preview it. And then for this one, I'm going to click on this blue color, and I'm just going to change this to like a red color. And then on this other tab right here, I'm going to click on this. I'm going to click on the RGB and then change these all to a value of 1, and that way it's going to be fully white. So I'm going to press Control Shift D, bring this down here, and then Control Shift and select it to preview it. So for this next one, I'm going to drag the red out, and then I'm also going to drag the white closer, maybe bring these a bit closer. And then I'm going to bring the black back as well. And then I'm going to hold down the Control key and click right here to add another one. Let's maybe bring this one over. And then for this color, I'm going to make this kind of a bluish grayish color, something like that. Maybe actually a little bit more towards the purple. And then hold down the Control key and click again to add another tab. I'll bring this one over. And then this one, I want to have the same red color. So I'm going to click on the color here, hover my mouse over the color and press Control C to copy it. And then I can click on this tab here, hover my mouse over the color and press Control V, and that'll paste it. And I really like this one. I think this one looks really cool. cool. It's very abstract and it almost reminds me of something that you would see like in a comic book. And especially with the dark wireframe, it makes it look like it was hand drawn or it was an illustration or something like that. All right, 2 more that I want to create. Control-Shift-D to duplicate it, stick it here, and then I can Control-Shift and select it to preview it, and then just press the backspace with the color ramp selected to reset the color ramp. So for this one, I'm going to make like a dark purplish pink color. So I'm going to bring this one out here, click on the color, and then I'm going to make this like a purple color and make it really dark. And then I will hold down the control key and click right there in the center to add another tab. Maybe bring this one over. And then this one is going to be mostly white and much brighter. So it's going to be kind of a bright pink. And then to make this even darker, you can drag the black tab out and it's going to be even darker. And I do think this looks really cool. I'm going to make one more and that's going to be a green one. So I'm going to press Control-Shift-D, bring this down here, and then I can Control-Shift and select it. And then I can make these like some green colors. So maybe like a dark green. And then also let's do maybe like a light green. All right, so there we go. So I've created a bunch of different color variations. So I'm going to first press the Tab key to go back to object mode. And then I can just Control-Shift and select the Stylized Shader just so that we get that viewer node out of there. And then I can press Tab again to go back into the node group. So you can see the first color ramp is going into this gray one. So we can now just take all the other color ramps and we can plug them into the extra circle here. So we can now take the next color ramp, plug this up here, and the next one, kind of bring this down and just continue to plug all of these up to the group output. All right, so there we go. So these are all plugged up. And then to rename it, you can press the N key and that's going to open up the side panel. And then right here on the outputs, we can change the names of the outputs. So I'm going to rename this one to like gray, blue, and also red. All right, so I've now renamed all of these. And so I'm now going to press the Tab key to go back out here. And so you can see now we have the Stylized Shader, we have the light rotation. So I can now just Control-Shift and click on the Stylized Shader, and that's going to preview all the different colors that we've created. Now, when it comes to the light rotation, my 2 favorite values that I like to use are 420 on the Z rotation, and then the other one that I like to use is 140. And why I like 140 is because it makes it really bright right here, at least on this object. It will look a little bit different depending on your object, but I really like that it's super bright over here, but then kind of up here it's more dark. And then of course, if you want to change the color of the wireframe, you can click right here on this object to preview the wireframe color, and then I can change this to any color that I want. So a dark blue might look pretty cool, so I could change this to like a dark blue, and that does look pretty cool, but I think black looks the best. So I'm gonna make this fully black. So there we have it. So there is the Stylized Shader. So I think this is a really cool shader for showing off your wireframes, or if you're trying to create maybe like a blueprint style artwork, or if you're trying to create something that you want to look like hand drawn or some sort of like vector art or illustration or something like that. And some of these color variations also give it a very comic book style. And if you'd like to help support me and this channel and purchase the material, then you can get that over on my Gumroad store and my Patreon page. I'll have the links in the description. So I hope you found this useful, and thank you for watching.